Hi, I'm Mary Ellen LaTarte, and it's my pleasure today to read A Bad Case of Stripes by David Shannon. He's got a wonderful imagination. If you haven't already read this book, I suggest you go to the library and read it, whether you're 5 or 105. This book is one of David Shannon's many books, as a matter of fact, but I think this is my favorite. Camilla Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today, she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits. Do you have that many? But none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. Then she screamed. Her mother ran into the room, and she screamed too. "Oh, my heavens," she cried. "You're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camilla's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camilla answered. "But just look at me." "You get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camilla was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what the other kids would say. And she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camilla. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" "No," Camilla told him. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me." And off he went. The next day was a disaster. Everyone at school laughed at Camilla. They called her Camilla Crayon and Night of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything were normal. But when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out in stars. The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots." Sure enough, Camilla turned all purpley polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard," and a pattern of squares covered her skin. Soon everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camilla was changing faster than you could change channels on a TV. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camilla home from school. She's just too much of a distraction. And I've been getting calls from the other parents. They're afraid those stripes may be contagious." Camilla was so embarrassed she couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now, nobody wanted to be in the same room with her. Her father tried to make her feel better. Is there anything I can do for you, sweetheart? He asked. No, thank you, sighed Camilla. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans, but she had been laughed at enough for one day. Well, yes, I see, Dr. Bumble mumbled when Mr. Cream phoned the next day. I think I'd better bring in the specialist. We'll be right over. About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. This is Dr. Grope, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young. Then the specialists went to work on Camilla. They squeezed and jabbed, taped, and tested. It was very uncomfortable. Well, it's not the mumps, concluded Dr. Grope. Or the measles, said Dr. Sponge. Definitely not chickenpox, put in Dr. Cricket. Or sunburn, said Dr. Young. Try these, said the specialists. They each handed her a bottle filled with different colored pills. Take one of each before bed, said Dr. Grope. Then they filed out the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camilla took her medicine. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she did feel different. But when she got dressed and her clothes didn't fit right, she looked in the mirror. And there, staring back at her, was a giant, multicolored pill with her face on it. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called. But this time, instead of the specialists, he brought the experts. Dr. Gourd and Mr. Mellon were the finest scientific minds in the land. Once again, Camilla was poked and prodded, looked at and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers. They huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gourd finally spoke. It might be a virus, he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all over Camilla. Or possibly some form of bacteria, said Mr. Mellon. Out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. Or it could be a fungus, added Dr. Gourd. Instantly, Camilla was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camilla, then at each other. We need to go over these numbers again back at the lab, Dr. Gourd explained. We'll call you when we know something. But the experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure. By now, the TV news had found out about Camilla. Reporters from every channel were outside her house, telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing kid. Soon, a huge crowd was camped out on the front lawn. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, an old medicine man, a guru, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camilla's strange appearance until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail, but nothing worked. One day, A woman who called herself an environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camilla. Close your eyes, she said. Breathe deeply and become one with the room. I wish you hadn't said that, Camilla groaned. Slowly, she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth. Her nose was a dresser, and 2 paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran from the house. What are we going to do? Cried Mrs. Cream. It just keeps getting worse and worse. She began to sob. At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet little knock at the front door. He opened it, and there stood an old woman who was just as plump and sweet as a strawberry. Excuse me, she said brightly, but I think I can help. She went into Camilla's room and looked around. My goodness, she said with a shake of her head. What we have here is a bad case of stripes. One of the worst I've ever seen. She pulled a container of small green beans from her bag. Here, she said, these might do the trick. Are those magic beans? Asked Mrs. Cream. Oh my, no, replied the kind old woman. There's no such thing. There are just plain old lima beans. I'll bet you'd like some, wouldn't you? She asked Camilla. Camilla wanted a big heaping plate full of lima beans, more than just about anything. But she was still afraid to admit it. Yuck, she said. No one likes lima beans, especially me. Oh dear, the old woman said sadly. I guess I was wrong about you. She put the beans back in her bag and started toward the door. Camilla watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good, and being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she'd been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. Wait, she cried. The truth is, I really love lima beans. I thought so, the old woman said with a smile. She took a handful of beans and popped them into Camilla's mouth. So good, said Camilla. Suddenly, the branches, feathers, and squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camilla, and everything was back to normal. I'm cured, she shouted. Yes, said the old woman. I knew the real you was in there somewhere. She patted Camilla on the head. Then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterwards, Camilla wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care a bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never even had a touch of stripes again. So you know what to do. If you have stripes, eat your lima beans.
Hi, I'm Rich LaTarte from Lunenburg, and this evening I'll be reading to you a little story called Creepy Carrots. The author is Aaron Reynolds, and it is illustrated by Peter Brown. Now, we all love rabbits. We see them at the park. We see them in the woods. They're hopping along the road and in our gardens. Their cottontails bobbing. Rabbits love vegetables. They drive farmers and home gardeners crazy. They not only feast on the vegetables, but they eat the vines that provide nourishment to our plants and munch our green beans and the leaves of our beets, but they love carrots most of all. Many stories have been written about rabbits, and many rabbit characters have evolved over the years, both in literature and in entertainment. For example, the March Hare in Alice in Wonderland. Now there was a rabbit. Peter Rabbit, and how he loved Mr. McGregor's garden. Many of us here in Lunenburg can probably relate to that. Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd. Hey, what's up, Doc? Brer Rabbit and his adventures with Brer Fox and Brer Bear. In my opinion, Brer Rabbit may be the most interesting of all the rabbits. However, this evening, I will read a story about a new rabbit on the scene, Jasper Rabbit, and his adventures with a local carrot garden and what the carrots did to keep him from cleaning it out. And it sounds very Halloween-y. Jasper Rabbit loved carrots, and he took the fattest, crispest carrots from Krakenhopper Field anytime he wanted. This is until they started following him home. So let's start. Creepy carrots. Jasper Rabbit had a passion for carrots, and the carrots that grew in Krakenhopper Field were the very best. They were fat, they were crisp, and they were free for the taking. All he had to do was pluck. In the morning, on his way to school, he would snack on the way. He would snack with picking a few carrots and eating them on his way to school. On his way to the Little League practice, he would yank a few more and eat and nibble on those on his way. After playing baseball, he would rip some more from the carrots from the Krakenhopper Field and eat them on his way home. Jasper just couldn't get enough carrots. Until they started following him. Following him, you say? Following him. He couldn't see them, but he heard them. He first noticed something strange after the big game against the East Valley Hares. Jasper was about to help himself to a victory snack when he heard it. The soft, sinister tunk, 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 tunk of carrots creeping. He looked around. He didn't see any carrots creeping. He turned again, but there was nothing there. Just my imagination, he thought. But he hopped a little faster, his cottontail bobbing really up and down. That night, as he was brushing his teeth, there they were. They were in the bathroom. They were in the bathtub. They were on the floor. He turned around quickly, but there was nothing. He laughed at himself, picked his toothbrush off the floor, finished brushing his teeth, and went to bed very quickly. The next morning, he approached Krakenhopper Field slowly. He reached for 2 carrots, and nothing happened. He bit into one, and nothing happened. Phew, creepy carrots. This was ridiculous, he thought. When he arrived home that evening, he cried, "Mom, Mom, creepy carrots, they're in the shed." Well, Mom and Jasper went into the shed, and the shed was just a normal shed. There was a water pail, there were hoses, there were other tools. There were no carrots, not even the regular kind. "There are no such thing as creepy carrots," Mom said, shaking her head. Later that night, as Jasper lay in bed, he heard it. Breathing. Terrible, carroty breathing. And there on his wall were creepy carrots. He shouted, "Dad, Dad!" His dad thumped into the bedroom and he threw on the light, and the shadow of the creepy carrot disappeared. They looked under the bed. No carrots. No creepy carrots. They looked through the closet. No carrots. No creepy carrots. They opened the dresser drawers. No creepy carrots. Just a bad dream, son, his dad said, shaking his head. Now go to sleep. Well, it looks to me that the carrots are celebrating Halloween early by tormenting poor Jasper Rabbit with their carrot shadows and their thump, thump, thump. I know this will be a different Halloween in 2020 for you, but have any carrots rung your doorbell looking for treats or pulling tricks when they don't get any candy or fertilizer? Would you water them? What would you do if wobbly witches or petrified pumpkins rang the doorbell and asked trick or treat? I don't know what I'd do. Well, by the end of the week, Jasper was seeing carrots everywhere. On the windowsill, on the sidewalk, in the road, even in the cemetery. Jasper knew his parents were wrong. Creepy carrots were real, and they were coming for him. But they couldn't get him if they couldn't get out. Jasper had a brainstorm. He hatched a plan. First thing the next morning, he grabbed some supplies, put them in his wagon, and he headed to Kraken Hopper Field. First thing he did is he measured the field. He measured the carrot field. He got out his tools. He began to saw. He even built a moat around the field. He watered the moat. He got out his hammer and nailed plywood together and built a fence all around Kraken Hopper Field. When the sun finally set across Kraken Hopper Field, Jasper Rabbit smiled. On his way home, there was no tunk, 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 tunk. There were no carrot-shaped shadows. His plan had worked. No creepy carrots would ever get out of that carrot patch again. And as the sun finally set, the carrots of Kraken Hopper Field cheered. Their creepy plan had worked. They were sure of it. Jasper Rabbit would never get into that carrot patch ever again and pick carrots on his way to school and on his way home.
Thank you for watching Lunenburg Storytime, the books we love. If you'd like to get involved and become a reader, we'd love to have you come into our studio and read a book that you love. Our contact information is lunenburgaccess@gmail.com. So send us an email today and let us know if you'd like to become a reader.